So it's a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Ceri Davies. He's Professor Emeritus in Swansea University. He graduated in the classics in the University of Wales and Oxford. He lectured in Cardiff University and then moved to Swansea University, where he became head of department. And retired in 2011, and he has studied especially the classicists of the Renaissance in Wales. He's produced a volume on Latin introductions in the Renaissance and Latin writers of the Renaissance. Welsh literature and the classical tradition in 1985, and about John Davies and Mathlwyd in 2001, and most recently about Huw Pryce, a defence of the British history in 2015. Between 1976 and 88, he was a member of the translation committee for the Apocrypha and the New Testament for the 1988 publication. And so, whether you have read these other books or not, you will have been indebted to him for his work on the Bible. So, John Williams is from Ystradmeurig, classicists, schoolmasters, and clerics. And the Reverend John Williams, the Arhenser, as he was called, who followed on from Edward Richard, and his son, the Archdeacon John Williams, who died in 1858, the first warden of Llandovery College. So thank you very much, Ceri, and we look forward very much to what you have to share with us. Well, thank you, and good morning to you. So, it was in Ystradmeurig, just north of Tregaron. That's where we begin our discussion this morning, and especially in the school set up there at Richard in the first half of the 18th century. It's been referred to very much in Gofal and Gwynllan as where Thomas Jones Cretan, John Owen Dressington, John Hughes, Llawr Madan Fawr were educated, and Gerald Morgan had a presentation, Edward Richard, and his most important pupil, Ieuan Fawr, and that's been published by now in the Gofal and Gwynllan volume. So I want to speak about the next schoolmaster there, John Williams, and unlike John Edward Richard, John Williams had been ordained, and then his son, also John Williams, who became Archdeacon of Ceredigion, and who was an academic himself, mostly outside of Wales. And John Williams, called the head sir, was one of the pupils of Edward Richard. He was born in 1746 in Ystradmeurig near Ystradmeurig, the son of a blacksmith, David Williams, who was actually a Methodist exhorter. We're not far from Daniel Rowland's authorities. And David Williams was one of the four exhorters in Ceredigion mentioned in the early Methodist records of the 1740s. And he was a supervisor for the county. That's very That, of course, was a movement within the Anglican Church, and for several generations, it was like that. That the polarization which within the church wasn't as extreme as we might think. Edward Richard didn't like the enthusiasm of the Methodists from what he wrote in poetry and prose about them. That wasn't a problem for David Williams to send his send his son to be educated by Edward Richard. And one of his sons was Evan Williams, who became a bookseller in the Strand in London. So, well, there was a lot of elementary education taking place in Ystradmeurig, but it became famous for classical education in Latin and Greek, and Edward Richard was in charge of that. And two of the sons of Lewis, Morris, were educated there. And then when Morris said in his to his brother Richard in 1760, he said, Ned Richards from Ystradmeurig, when my children are learning Latin with him, is a great scholar. And there's a famous story recorded in the Staines, Sioned by Sylvan Evans, about a tutor of Oxford coming to Ystradmeurig to kind of battle it out in Greek and Latin. And he Edward Richard had his pupils go out to the roads outside Ystradmeurig, pretending to be labourers, and the people from Oxford asked the way to the school, and they were directed in Latin, and then they asked at the next crossroads, and they were answered in Greek. So by then, by the time the visitors reached the school, the workers had come back and changed their clothes back to be the students there. Well, whether true or not, that's part of the legends of Ystradmeurig School. But there was a lot more to the school as it developed under Richard. There was a great library there, the Bodley of Wales, but somebody might have been a bit too enthusiastic about it. But we don't have time to go on about that. But over 300 volumes went from the library to St David's College, Lampeter, after the school closed in 1974. Now, only theological works are more in number than the classical ones. But also, Edward Richard, more than being a great teacher, he set up the school on strong constitutional, financial foundations, and he was supported in that by some of the great families of Ceredigion, Vaughan's of Trawscoed, and the Powells of Nantes, and he ensured that 32 sons at the time could be educated there.
Direct that the schoolmaster shall be a person professing the religion of the Church of England, of a good moral character, and well qualified to teach the Greek and Latin classics as taught in the principal grammar schools in England.
You notice that reference to grammar schools, though many of us were attended grammar schools. Right, and but I remember. So, uh, so, so the grammar meant learning Latin and being able to write it. That's what the grammar was from the 16th century onwards. As M.L. Clark, an expert in classical education, and became a Latin professor in Bangor University.
School education was the Latin grammar.
That was Edward Richards' ideal, as well as taught in the principal grammar schools in England. And in just a month before he died in 1777, he says this.
Is not to be sinecure. You must get your bread by labour and industry. This is my will, and I hope it will be observed. Discharge, therefore, your trust faithfully. Well,
the one who was appointed to succeed him was John Williams, who was the head there from 1441, from 1777 till his death, 1818. John Williams never attended a university. He was only trained in Ystradmeurig, but he was a teacher in the places. In 1765, he went to be a teacher in Wittstock in Pembrokeshire, one of the new houses of the Methodists. And then he'd moved to, within a year, to Cardigan to be a teacher in the grammar school there. Like in Cardigan, despite the Methodist influences on him, he became a high churchman following the Bishop Charles Morson of St. Davies, who ordained him deacon in 1768, and then in 1770 a priest. And then in 1771 he went to Ross-on-Wye over the border. And then when Edward Richard died in 1777, he was appointed at 32 years old as who was as the head of a Ystradmeurig school and an associated school in Lledrod. Well, these 40 years under the care of John Williams was the golden age of a scholar Ystradmeurig. Between 1912 and 1815, the schoolhouse was built, which still stands next door to St. John's Church. And at one time, there were as many as 150 pupils in the school. And he followed Edward Richard in every way. And he noted, he wrote Edward Richards's biography in English in 1811, and Evan Williams, his brother, publisher in London, published that. One of the most important things that happened in the school's history, and also to the grammar school in Cardigan and the Queen Elizabeth School in Carmen, was that Samuel Horsley, Bishop of St. David's, and his followers about the formation of the clerics of the their diocese. There was a worry about the mountain clergymen, as they were called, who had not been to Oxford or Cambridge, but who were faithful servants as deacons and priests, and the pastoral care would have been lacking without them. And some of the nonconformist academies had high standards, such as Castell Llywel, Carmarthen, and Neil Lloyd, and that embarrassed the Anglicans. Well, the Bishop Horsley, to deal with these problems, decided that the Ystradmeurig school, among others, would be the theological
is to admit to students in divinity. Another caution I would earnestly recommend is to admit no students in divinity who have not made such a proficiency in school learning as to be able to construe the Greek Testament and the common Latin authors with tolerable proficiency.
So those schools were to be the theological seminaries, in effect. And Horsley then listed some of the authors who should be studied: Hugo Grotius on the truth of the Christianity, John Pearson on the Creed, and Jan Elger, Bishop Butler, and Epictetus, Xenophon, and Cicero, etc. There's nothing mentioned in Welsh, unfortunately. Not Dyfyniad Fydd Eglwys Loegr or Reol Bychyr Ddamcair. So, anyway, John Williams embraced the challenge effectively, and D.G. Osmond Dawnes, in his rather hagiographic story of the school, said that clerics like Horsley and Cleaver, Bishop of Bangor, then St. Ethef, made sure that there were no today's printed ordination to compare those of Williams's as regards their classical and theological knowledge until the opening of Lampeter College at the end of the 1820s. Ystradmeurig raised the academic standards of rural priests very much. So that was not the end of the contributions by John Williams. You remember, as Edward Richard said, to teach the lead Greek and Latin classics at all the principal grammar schools in England.
May be qualified for either of the universities of Oxford or Cambridge.
Well, that was quite a challenge, remembering the work of the principal grammar schools in England. But John Williams did produce students who made their way to Oxford or Cambridge, especially Oxford, and one and two of his own sons among them. The first, his eldest son, David Williams, and he became a fellow of Wadham College in Oxford, and he became the successor of his father in Ystradmeurig, but died only 5 years after he took up the role. But let's go to the other son, the younger one. He was a great teacher and cleric, and has been rather ignored despite his concerns for Wales, perhaps because he spent his half his life in outside Wales. He was born in 1792 in Ystradmeurig and educated at his father's son. And at 15 years old, he became a teacher in Chiswick, Middlesex, and then in Ludlow, and then in 1810, he won a scholarship to Balliol College in Oxford, which was a completely Anglican university, and the fellows almost all ordained Anglicans, and every student expected to follow the Anglican faith. But there was no honour school for BA in theology. Only in the later century in the century that came to be, but an honours school had been established in the classics, literae humaniores, and that in 1807, 3 years before John Williams reached Balliol, and he took that course. And 4 years later, he graduated only one of four in the first class, and that included Thomas Arnold, the eminent headmaster of rugby later on. He was appointed the classics teacher in Winchester College under Dr. Gabel, that had been established in the 14th century by William O. Wycombe, Bishop of Winchester, among other things, to prepare sons to go on to Oxford, which was in New College. And John Williams was the first non-Wycomist to be appointed, and that says a lot about his gifts. But that doesn't mean that this co-workers in the new college were happy with that. He and they encouraged the people to strike against him. But he was supported by the head, and then he moved to teach in High Davies School, again near Winchester, and then he was ordained at that time as well. And then he returned to Cardigan in 1820, invited Thomas Burchurst. He was made after the death of Eliezer Williams as vicar of Lampeter and head of the very successful grammar school that Eliezer had established there. It was only 2 years since his father died. His brother was by now the head of Ystradmeurig, and there was talk of establishing a college to teach ordinance in Lampeter, probably. And people came to him from far and wide, including a son of Sir Walter Scott, all the way. Walter Scott, John Gibson Lockhart, had been a friend of Williams in Oxford, and he had suggested that Charles Scott should be sent to be trained, and John Williams in Lampeter. he was very much respected as a vicar of Lampeter, and he preached when the foundation stone of Lampeter College was set in 1822, and he probably saw himself as a likely candidate for the first principal of the college, but Burgess obviously didn't think like that. And in 1824, sensing how the wind was blowing, John Williams, who'd just married Mary Evans from Llanillar, he and became a rector of a new school in Edinburgh, Ystradmeurig Academy, spotted by Walter Scott. As M.L. Clark says, it was designedly classical school to prepare boys for universities in Scotland and Oxford and Cambridge as well. In the Presbyterian Scotland, and there was no sectarian complement at all on the school's board of governors. And it's amazing that an Anglican Welshman from Ystradmeurig was to establish the first, the greatest schools in Scotland, and he was there in Edinburgh, and as Walter Scott said, he was the best schoolmaster in Europe. He was helped by other teachers, but he taught the highest classes in Latin and Greek, and the names of some of the people who studied under him were noteworthy. E.g. Archibald Campbell Tate became Bishop of London and Archbishop of Canterbury, who had a great respect to John Williams. And Bishop Tate took John Williams's funeral in 1858. Well, John Williams stayed in Edinburgh from 1824 to 1847. And that's true, but there was a gap in his headship of the academy to the disappointment of Walter Scott and others. After 3 years, Williams said he was leaving after being appointed in 1827 as Professor of Roman Language and Literature in the new establishment, which would come to be known as University College London. That was quite a feather in Williams's hat. This would be a chair which later on would be held by important Latinists like Robinson Ellis, a gay houseman. But when a few months before the college actually opened in 1828, he resigned because he was pressurized not to be a part of the godless college on Gower Street. As he resigned, he said, courage to have the hostility of my own order, and you were offeriadydd Anglicanydd, and to array myself in battle against the lawn sleeves and mitred fronts of my ecclesiastical superiors. He and his family didn't move from Edinburgh. And actually, yes. He worked on a volume published in 1829, The Life and Action of Alexander the Great, and preparing everybody for his greatest work, his 400-page work on Homer, which was published in 1842. in the and he was reappointed in 1829 as head teacher to relieve on many, and as Walter Scott said, he'd fallen with a heavy thump upon this reverential rump. Well, let's wait a minute. What? What turned him against the job in London was the Anglican pressure. The Mitre Transformation despite being so much a classical scholar, he could see himself as having influence in the church world, especially in Wales. He remained vicar of Peter, despite being Edinburgh with curates doing the work. Yes, he was appointed Archdeacon of Ceredigion by John Banks Jenkinson, the bishop, in 1833. How he could do that from Cardigan, I don't know, but the bishop himself was Dean of Durham at the same time as being Bishop of St. David's. And Jenkinson died in 1814. There was pressure to appoint John Williams as the bishop, as a Welsh-speaking Welshman, as the Captain General said.
We know that such an appointment would be highly satisfactory to the clergy of the see. And if a brilliant academical career in which he bore away the first honours the university had to offer, and if a proud position in the Republic of Letters can recommend a talented man and a profound scholar to the consideration of Her Majesty and her professional advisers, the name of the author of the life of Alexander the Great will come down on the Congé d'Élire to the chapter of St. David's.
Well, John Williams was disappointed then, and the editor of the Cumraeg Journal, and the diocese didn't learn more about Alexander the Great. Not Thirlwell was appointed himself a great classical scholar, and wrote the 8 volumes of history of Greece, many of them in Abergwili. But after serving the Ystradmeurig Academy, in 1847, John Williams left Edinburgh and he came to Llandovery to be the first warden of the Welsh Collegiate Institution. The Llandovery College, as it came to be known very soon, and was just established by Thomas Phillips, the rich doctor from Radnorshire, and despite the challenges in buildings, etc., he became, John Williams came back to the church and academic circles in Wales. He must have felt a great attraction among the trustees of the schools were Lady Llanover, Thomas Pryce, Canianwch, and William Rhys at Llandovery. And here's a portrait of the great Welsh foundations that were intended for schools by Thomas Phillips.
The study and cultivation of the Welsh or ancient British language and literature, not only as a medium of colloquial communication, but as a means of promoting antiquarian and philological investigation. in combination with a good, sound, classical and liberal education, fitting for young men destined for any liberal profession or scientific pursuit to be followed in the Principality of Wales, and more especially for young men desirous of qualifying themselves to be efficient ministers of the church in that principality.
And John Williams set about to ensure this happened effectively. He had become interested in Edinburgh with the Welsh Manuscript Society, and after coming to Llandovery, he edited an edition of the Huw by the Welsh Evans in 1851, and he made sure that Welsh had an honoured place in the school. It's another matter how the successors interpreted this. But think about him appointed to Llandovery in the year that the Blue Books were published, and and he said in a sermon on the opening of the school on St Davies 1848.
Report of the commissioners, much less allow ourselves to be irritated. Perhaps we may be justified in reminding them that although they have been bitter admonishers of our poorer brethren, although they have noted down with servile fidelity the harsher features of the national countenance, they have utterly failed to give any indication of the living soul which is still visible in the flashing eye and eloquent expression of the whole face.
So the name of John Williams should be noted with the names of Ian Gwyddel and Lewis Edwards and others among the most strongest critics of the reports. And even though he was one of the pillars of the Anglican establishment in Wales, he did say this: they went all in the pockets of the commissioners. In the same sermon, he talks about the spirit of religious independence among the Welsh, and echoing Bishop Richard Davies's comments in 1567 on the religious Protestantism of Cymru from the early days. There was a difficult relationship with John Williams and Colin Thirlwell, for example. John Williams was critical of Lampeter College and about attitudes to the Welsh language. And he was again disappointed when Alfred Ollivant was to Llandovery in 1849. John Williams had his supporters who were lobbying, or perhaps lobbying too much on his behalf, including former students of Ystradmeurig, such as the Society of Welsh Clergymen in West Riding of Yorkshire, David Dames, Vicar of Kirkdale in Liverpool, and 5 years after setting up the school in Llandovery, John Williams left for Hertfordshire in England. He was disappointed, probably, but he still published the life of Julius Caesar. Well, disappointing or not, John Williams definitely was his own man. and a strong character. As Bishop Tate, his former student in Edinburgh, said about him 15 years after his death.
Improves those amongst whom he lives by the very conversation which is his pleasure. So this man taught us in a way that none but a very able man indeed can teach. He had his faults, as who has not? And many may conceive that those faults, as he grew older, predominated. He had indeed a strong opinion of his own prowess, but he taught as none but a man of great intellectual power could teach, and he fascinated his pupils as none but a man of feeling could those with whom he has to do.
Without doubt, the Archdeacon was one of the greatest people that Wales produced in the early part of the 19th century, and he was a man of feeling, independent in judgment, and he could go against what was expected by the church establishment of his day. Well, those talents and aspects would have been very acceptable to his grandfather, the Methodist blacksmith from Ystradmeurig. So that's an excellent literature, and about the old elder John Williams and his son who was ready to defend the Welsh language, for example, when it was being attacked at that time. But because of the timetable, we'll have to leave the questions until the informal session at 11, and that will allow people to think further about the questions. I'm sorry for going over time, and can I thank you very much? Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Huw Pryce, who was Professor Emeritus in Bangor University, where he worked for almost 40 years, and an honorary professor in Cardiff University. His main field is medieval Welsh history, and he's published Native Law and the Church in Medieval Wales in 1983, and well, the Acts of Welsh Rulers in 1120, 1283, published in 2005. Princes, published in 2006. J. Lloyd, in the creation of Welsh history in 2011, and writing Welsh history from the early Middle Ages to the 21st century, published recently in 2022. Yes, he's talking about Ithel, Longueville Jones, and the history of Wales. We're very glad for Professor Pryce is here this morning, so we look forward to your presentation. Thank you very much for the warm introduction, Ainsley, and to be asked to talk this morning. I'm going to talk about two contemporaries, both ordained in the Church of England in the 19th century, and both of them for several years worked together on two matters we will talk about later on. and the most influential of that work was the establishment of Archaeologia Cambrensis, a magazine, and the Welsh Antiquarian Society. So, although they were contemporaries, they were quite different as well. So, look at what the
John Williams,
similarity and differences were. John Williams, Ithel came from the old family name Bethel. He was a Welsh-speaking Welshman from Denbighshire. We'll come back to the biographies later, but things were similar between them. They were ordained as priests. They were influenced by Romanticism in different ways. And they were both opposed to uniting the St Asaph and Bangor diocese in order to create a new bishopric of Manchester. They both were interested in the history of Wales, and they established together Archaeologia Cambrensis and the Antiquarian Society. Well, John Williams was a Welsh-speaking Welshman who spent most of his life in Wales, apart from a few years in Oxford, where he graduated in Jesus College and became back to Wales and was serving priest in Wales. Harry Longueville Jones was born in London. He was a bit separated from Wales in a way. He didn't live in Wales till he was in his 40s, and we don't know how much Welsh he had. And he was never a serving priest in Wales. And even though they were both influenced by the Romanticism of Iolo Morano, Ithel was very much influenced by Iolo Morgannwg, but it was romantic medievalism that influenced Harry Longueville Jones, and including the landscape of Wales. Williams was as an uncritical patriot, whereas Harry Longueville Jones certainly sympathised with Welsh patriotism, but he was more critical of the historical tradition. So the differences were more obvious than the similarities. So let's just have a look at the lives of both of them, and then discuss how they came to know each other and work together. And then in the rest of the address, look at their attitudes to the Welsh past. So John Williams of Ithel was born in Llangyhafel, Denbighshire. He then went to Jesus College and was ordained in 1836. And then he became perpetual curate of Nerquis in Flintshire. And then he was appointed the rector of Llanymawddwy. And there that he publishes quite a lot. And then he was moved to Llanelwyn in Monmouthshire and died soon after arriving there. So he wasn't long a rector there. Well, Ithel was at quite a young age interested in church history, even before he went to Nercwys. He'd published a book, the and about the Church of England and versus the Church of Rome, and he developed that in the classical Antiquities of the Cymry in 1846. I'll return to that later. And then he was interested in the history of Wales, and especially Iolo Morgannwg's ideas about the history of Wales. I won't talk about all of his publications. He was very productive that way, and even though we see him as kind of superstitious and uncritical, but many during his time thought of him as a serious academic. That's why he was asked to become an editor for the Welsh Manuscript Society, and he produced his own volumes later on. He edits two sets of medieval chronicles, and Elis Cambria and Brita Tywysogion here. People still complain that there have been no further editions of these publications, but he certainly did follow William Owen Pugh, although he doesn't recognize that. And then he became particularly into the public view in the Greatest Eisteddfod Llangollen in 1858, and that's when Thomas Stevens's dissertation on Madag Owen Gwynedd about his alleged journey to discover America. But Thomas Stevens showed that this was a legend. The Williams and other people didn't like that. So it was shown that Thomas Stevens was not had not produced something on the subject. So that shows how Ithel stuck to legendary matters in the history of Wales. And he looks generally at written texts and many documents that had come to light in the Myvyrian archaeology, for example. Well, Harry Longueville Jones, he was born in Piccadilly, quite a rich area of London. He then became a accountant in Cambridge, and then became a fellow in Magdalen College, and then spent several years there. I think I should write it. How much of a Welsh was he? I think that well, he was a Jones. He's interested in Wales, but how much of a Welshman was he? He had a grandfather from Wrexham, and also he had but others contacts were in near Shrewsbury. So he never lived in Wales until he was 40 years old. He was interested in Wales, and from an early age, he obviously felt Welsh. Yeah, yeah. Well, and there was also what we call now an elephant folio, illustrations of natural scenery of the Estonia Mountains, published a year after he graduated in Cambridge, and there are the pictures reproduced there. So, from a sketch by H.L. Jones, so that was him, and he was a great craftsman. They're mostly landscapes, and the new Penrhyn Castle is seen there. So, influenced by the Romanticism, which concentrated on the landscape. And there's an influence of Thomas Pennant there as well. And he quotes from one of the ancient bards on the website. So he was trying to understand a bit about Wales and the Welsh language at that time. So we should emphasize Harry Longueville Jones didn't publish anything in Welsh, but he may have learned to read Welsh, and he was certainly sympathetic to Welsh. Although he was ordained a priest in 1831, he got married a few years later, and with a woman called Frances Weston from the south of to the south of Shrewsbury. But according to the regulations then, he had to give up his fellowship in Cardigan, and he actually goes off to Paris with his wife. Well, and the cost of living there was lower than in London, for example. But it shows the fact that he was looking for new experiences, etc. He was there for 7 years or so, He tried to earn a living there as a journalist. He worked for an English language newspaper for expatriates, etc. there. And William Thackeray, the novelist, worked with him. And Thackeray in his letters talks about Jones. And he makes a new edition of Caliani's Paris Guide. So obviously he needed to raise money for himself. He is also shows an interest in several developments in being a corresponding member of the Manchester Statistical Society and then the London Statistical Society. And then he contributes about the economy of France to that. And he obviously sees this as a step in social improvement. So that's one aspect of his interests. And in 1839, he had a good enough name as an antiquarian to become one of the 8 corresponding members for England on the historical committee for the arts and antiquities in France, and that happened under King Louis Philippe. And this was looking into old buildings and other antiquities in France, which really made Jones think as he looked at archaeology in Wales. So, but also he adds to his income by contributing to several volumes and magazines, but basically and the conservative publication in Edinburgh, and he was quite a committed Tory, and suggested it might be good for the nobility to still lead society. But he spoke about a lot of things, and in the National Library of Scotland has many of his articles. Right, and though they're anonymous articles, we can work out which ones were his. So, but to go on back to being a member of this committee in Paris, one of the other things he did in Paris was to go around and study many churches. And that led to a report which he made in 1840 to the Minister of Public Education in Paris. So there are no pictures included, unfortunately, and he describes different churches in the area and talks about their condition and the work that needs to be done to conserve them. Well, and he puts his MA there, and that he was. I know he was a member of the Commission for Antiquities, and I will show later on something I wrote about the Church and Gentleman's magazine. He liked writing articles, and he went around studying the antiquities of France, and enjoyed traveling in France itself. So looking at his house, I'd noticed that I'd been looking at out at his house on the other side of the Menai Strait, without noticing. He gave up living in Paris and then moved to Britain and lived in Manchester. And I don't know, he had to buy a house or whatever, but he came over a school. He took over a school in Dover Street. Among his contemporaries was William Gaskell and Elizabeth Gaskell, the well-known hymn writer. But I haven't found any direct connection on Jones and Gaskell's, and he became part of the Statistical Society, and he obviously he was paid quite well for this work. And but he says he said that even though it was profitable work, it was difficult, and of course the air in Manchester wasn't healthy because of all the industry, and then he had been going back and forth to Llandegfan to Ynys Môn to study the churches there, and then he has this house built. He talks about building a cottage in Anglesey, but it doesn't look much of a cottage there, about 8 bedrooms. That's between Llandegfan and Beaumaris. So he moves finally there in 1848. And but he had been establishing contacts with the Bangor Cathedral, and he gives most of his library, almost 550 volumes, to the cathedral in Bangor. And the chapter hadn't really made the best of the gift. They just left them in a pile in a room. But he is part of the buildings committee of the diocese as well. And and also working with Ithel establishing clergy conferences, and then the Cambrian Archaeological Association, and then in moving to Ynys he was rather in a fragile situation financially. He offers to work as a tutor. Well, Ceri is on about Ithel opposing the blue books, and Harry Longueville Jones says it's got to learn other languages, but defends the Welsh language very strongly, and he then becomes HMI for the church schools in Wales, and he holds this job for £60 a year, and he's in that post for a long time. But he had a difficult relationship with the authorities in London, and because partly he defended the use of Welsh in schools, and then his health broke down. He had several strokes, and he had to give up his work. But he had a pension, but he was in ill health for the rest of his life, and moved back to London at the end of his life. So a little bit about the collaboration between Ithel and Jones, and work together. Well, I spoke about the project, the plan to join the dioceses of Bangor and St Asaph, and they were both opposed to that, and were and were interested in a church commission plan to establish more churches, and well, part of this was the combining of the two dioceses, but this didn't happen in the end. But it's interesting that Ithel used historical arguments about not combining the two dioceses. And you can see here the Protestant vision of John Williams, Ystradmeurig.
In the island of purely British origin, which have been presided over regularly from the beginning, that they thus identify us in a special manner with the primitive and independent church of the soil, and that any diminution of their number would consequently and in a corresponding degree weaken their position in reference to the claims of Rome. In a work recently published, the Ecclesiastical Antiquities of the Cymry, I've noticed at some length the establishment of the ancient sees of Wales. Of course, mae hyn yn adwaith I
Well, so this is a reaction to the establishment of the re-establishment of the Catholic hierarchy in the middle of the 19th century, but that's not a subject for today. It's good to look at this at Asiatical antiquities of Cymru, showing the different ideas about how the church in Wales had been Protestant from the beginning, in a way, and references of to the bishops as living representatives of the ancient church. But as I noted on the introduction page, we see the influence of the Ola Morgannwg, and looking at the reference to the triads, and Iolo actually established most of these, and then talking about Gadan, who was supposed to have come from Troy, and brought the Welsh from theirs. I don't know, who was a legendary lawmaker, and the Bardo-Druidic Creed, which were the foundations of Iolo's ideas. So the bards, poets of Wales, were part of the Druidic tradition. So they worked most closely together with this periodical on Welsh antiquities. So this the College of the Bernardins there was established and in 19th century, and he took studied churches in Paris and in Wales. Oh, Jones, Ithel could contribute something to Jones because he was Welsh speaking, that he lived in Wales. Jones hadn't lived in Wales up to now. So Ithel had interesting context. Jones was an outsider, really, even though he had an interest in Welsh things. So we can understand why Jones thought it was worth working with Ithel. Ithel was most interested in documentation. He was interested in archaeology, and he contributed an article to the first edition of Archaeologia Cambrensis about Wally Cruises Abbey. And so, but Jones was the driving force behind Archaeologia Cambrensis and further, and you can see this in his kind of manifesto. I won't read every word because I know time is going. So you can see in red there the indebtedness to the French archaeological world and to the government of France as well. also he emphasizes a society that's needed for Wales as a whole, even though that would mean working with antiquarians throughout Britain. So he mentions the empire there. So the first meeting of the Antiquarian Society in 1847, Jones has publications to show from France. So, antiquarianism in England was important to them as well. I don't need to emphasize too much here, but the Archaeological Journal had been recently established. Unfortunately, the British Archaeological Association is up about the same time. Was split, and the magazine came under the control of one branch of that Albert Way, and Ithel and Ithel and Jones supported Way in that split. Well, and the Welsh Antiquarian Society followed the Archaeological Institute in Wales, and you see the emphasis on conservation there. Yeah, and the general secretaries there are noted as Jones and Williams, and a similar magazine had been established in France as well. But Jones and Ithel fell out by 1853, and Ithel couldn't accept this more scientific attitude to history, and Ithel sets his own Cambrian journal and the Cambrian Institute, which was there to share the Iolo Morgannwg type of ideas. No. What about Jones? Even though Jones sympathized with Wales and the Welsh, but there's some ambiguity there. But he had an attitude of an outsider, so he might have looked down a bit at the Welsh. They needed, a bit of a kick to get them to take notice of their background. I found almost dead in movement. It was saying things like this about archaeology almost dead in Wales. No movement, no centralisation, deep apathy. So, and then this volume, Travelling in Taffyland, seems a bit derogatory itself. So he might have felt that that we needed some guidance and support from an outside. Davies a Llambed. Wel, y sicr oedd gan Jones fan isel o'r sefydliad yna fan oedd hynafieithydd Thomas Phillips o Middle Hill
wedi gofyn iddo fo, oedd e eisiau rhoi llawer o'i lyfrau i ryw sefydliad yng Nghymru. Oedd Jones yn dweud, wel, pidwch da chi a rhoi nhw i goleg Llambed. Gwell i taflu nhw mewn i fai Ceredigion na gadael i beth oedd i galw yn the ploughboys who go up to Lampeter i biseddu y cyfrolau gwerthfawr hynny. Felly, chi'n gallu gweld bod na amwysedd a dweud y lleia. Felly, i gloi, a mae'n drwy gen i mynd hydig dros yr amser, jyst i gloi, gadewch i ni fi jyst tanlinellu hydig o bwyntiau am y ddau ddyn dwi wedi bod yn ei trafod da chi heddi. Iddyn nhw gydweithio am cyfnod byr, really, rhwng 1845 a 1853. Mae'n amlwg bod agweddau a Ithel a Jones at orffennol Cymru, a falle'n fwy eang, yn byr wahanol. A chwad, a beth wrth gwrs yn ffigwr dadleuol yn ystod ei oes, yn wedi ar ôl helyd Steddfod Llangollen. Ond eto, dwi'n meddwl mewn ffordd, mae'n mwy nodweddiadol o'r farn ymhlith ac agweddau hynafieithwyr a llenorion Cymreig i oes, a gafel gweledigaeth wladgarol romantaidd Iolo Morgannwg. Mae'n mwy nodweddiadol na Jones, dwi'n meddwl. A fel i wedi dweud, mae'n dibynnu bennaf destun ysgrifenedig a rai yn y Gymraeg oedd yn cynnig hanes hynafol a gawrwrol i'r Cymru yn ei dibe. Ac wrth gwrs, oedd e wedi treulio ran fwy amser yng Nghymru, profiad llai eang na Jones, allwch chi ddweud. Jones ar y llaw arall, dwi'n meddwl yn eitha diddorol, mae'n amlwg hoffter romantaidd o dirwedd, hynafieithau a diwylliant Cymru, ond hefyd cymhelliad diwygiadol, oedd hynny'n amlwg yn ei ddiddordeb yn ystadegau er enghraifft, ond braidd yn nawddoglyd. A wrth gyda fe'r syniad mwy cyffredinol, mae'r bonedd ar bendifigaeth fel y reoli'r gamdeithas yn gyffredinol, a bod angen i'r arweinwyr naturiol ma'n i farnau wthio'r Cymru ar hyd llwybr cynnydd. Ond oedd e'n gwerthfawrogi cenedligrwydd y Cymru am resymau ceidwadol. A dwi'n meddwl bod dyfyniad sy'n gen i jyst i gloi fan hyn am yr iaith Gymraeg yn un o'r ddwy erthygl yn beirniadu y llyfrau gleision yn ddiddorol. Dweud bod y Gymraeg yn strong bond and support of Welsh nationality and keeps alive in their breasts that indomitable love of their country and that spirit of national pride, which is the best safeguard of the liberties of the realm and its protection from democratic invasion. Hynny yw, chwildro, democratic sort of ysbryd chwildro Ffrengig. Felly mae'n gweld y Gymraeg ar y dadleuon am y Llydaweg, yr un peth dwi'n meddwl ti ar amser hyn, bod y Gymraeg mewn ffordd yn y ffordd i neu'n siŵr bod y Cymru yn deiliaid teyrngar i'r goron, a hefyd falle'n wrth glawdd yn erbyn gorganoli gan y Llywodraeth. Felly, dyna un ddadl oedd yn ei gyflwyno o blaid hybu'r Gymraeg. Ac yn sicr, fe fydd dioddau oedd un o'r comisiynwyr oedd wedyn yn dod yn gyfrifol am i bob pwrpas y bwrdd addysg Cei Shuttleworth yn fynd o'n nid Cei Shuttleworth, Lingen yn fynd o Agwedd Jones yn gwbl annibyniol. Beth bynnag, dyna'n fyr iawn rai sylwadau ar y ddau. Mae y ddau yn ddiddorol iawn yn ei ffyrdd gwahanol, ac y ddau, fel i dweud, wedi cydweithio am sbel, ond yn y bod, dwi'n meddwl, yn cynrychioli dwy agwedd wahanol at astudio'r gorffennol yng Nghymru yn y bedwaredd ganrif ar 15. Diolch yn fawr.
Wel, hyfryd. Diolch o galon i chi, Huw, am ein goleuo ni am ddau gymeriad hynod iawn. Fyswn ni'n gweud falle cymleth iawn. A Mae gen I lu o gwestiynau i ofyn i chi ynglyn ar ddau, a'i dylanwad ar ei gilydd ac ar ei dylanwad ar Gymru ag ati. A dwi'n ofni, falle bydd rhaid i ni gadw'r hynna tan ar ôl i ni orffen y sesiwn ffurfiol hon a symud y sesiwn paned a chlonc. Ond hoffwn i ddiolch yn fawr iawn i chi ac wrth gwrs i Ceri am ddau seminar arbennig iawn sydd wedi'n goleuo ni ac wedi'n tywys ni ar hyd llwybrau. O'n i'n eriod wedi tramwyo nhw o'r blaen o ran deall dylanwad y 4 cymeriad ni wedi sôn amdanyn nhw heddi. Felly diolch o galon i chi am y ddau gyflwyniad a ni'n edrych ymlaen nawr at y sesiwn paned a chlonc. Ond cyn i ni fynd at hwnna, gaich atgoffa chi bydd yr ail sesiwn yn y gyfres hon yn digwydd ar y 4 ar 20 o'r mis nesaf. 4 ar 20 o Chwefror, a bydd Angharad yn anfon manylion am y seminar honno maes o law. Ond am y tro, gadewch ni orffen nawr a symud i'r sesiwn paned a chlonc gyda diolch diffiant i'n ddau siaradwr.